Now, moving on, having heard from technical subject matter experts on responsible AI, we will now hear from a diverse group of experts in our multi-stakeholder dialogue on charting the future, aligning stakeholders on safe and equitable AI. This timely dialogue will cover the current state of global AI governance, pathways to achieve alignment, and measures to reduce inequities in global AI supply chains. Our first speaker is Dr. Ajai Garg, the Director of Digital Tech and Law Group at Anand and Anand. Dr. Garg is a seasoned technocrat with more than 2 decades of association with the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, where he has worked on several key divisions, including startup, innovation and IPR, international cooperation, amongst others. He will be joined on the panel by Mr. Suhel Bidani, lead digital and AI at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where he is responsible for digital interventions across the foundation's programmatic work in India. Next up, the panel will be joined by Mr. Abilash Soundararajan, the founder and CEO of PrivaSapien, a startup specializing in privacy-enhancing technologies and responsible AI. Abilash has over 19 years of experience and over 40 patents in areas like AI, privacy, cybersecurity, blockchain, and Wi-Fi. Next up, we'll also have Dr. Anulekha Nandi, Fellow in Technology, Economy, and Society at the Observer Research Foundation. Dr. Nandi's primary area of research includes digital innovation management and governance, focusing on AI, emerging tech, and digital infrastructures. Lastly, the dialogue will be moderated by Ms. Eunsong Kim, who's a gender program specialist and chief of Sector for Social and Human Sciences at UNESCO, New Delhi. I request all the panelists as well as the moderators to please take the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the very interesting panel discussion today. It's called the Multi-Stakeholder Dialogue on Safe and Equitable AI. I would like to take the opportunity to thank the folks at Nasscom for convening a very timely discussion on AI governance, AI ethics, how to make AI safe, and most importantly, equitable. My name is Eunsong Kim, and I work for UNESCO, leading the AI ethics work here in the region, and it's a privilege to be moderating this discussion. There's no doubt about the fact that AI is reshaping our world. We've seen fantastic use cases and tricky use cases today. The mental health piece is fascinating, but it has a lot of potential, but also a lot of risks and safety. Some studies project mind-boggling figures on the impact of AI on our economy. While we're grappling with all of this economic potential, there are huge issues on the impact, the societal impact of AI on our society at large. There are issues of bias, gender gaps, data privacy, deepfake, misinformation, disinformation, the environmental costs, the list goes on. I'll give you a few concrete statistics. A 2021 UNESCO study titled Bias Against Women and Girls in LLMs revealed worrying tendency of models to reproduce gender bias as well as homophobia and racial stereotyping. According to Interface, women make up only 22% of AI global talent, and fewer than 15% hold senior roles. Surveys show over and over again, nearly 82% of Indians have clicked on or fallen for fake messages powered by sophisticated AI tools. So amidst all of these risks, countries and governments and international organizations like UNESCO have been trying to grapple with the situation. How do we manage these risks? There are platforms and discussions at the global AI governance level and exploring multiple engagements and arrangements. UNESCO in 2021 adopted the recommendation on the ethics of AI, and till date, it is the only normative instrument at the global level that guides AI development in an ethical manner. We have GPAI, the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence. India was the presidency last year, facilitating research and policy development on responsible AI. The AI Action Summit in France is upcoming in 2025, and the Secretary General just launched the AI Office in New York. So there's a lot of things going on. I think today's panel is really to understand the global AI landscape a little bit better, understand what global and national stakeholders can work together to navigate the space? And last but not least, what is India's role? So for today, we have 4 distinguished panelists. I think they were introduced very well. But just to start off the context, I would like to raise a question to all of you, and anybody can chime in. What do you think is the primary risk currently in the AI global landscape? And what are some activities or actions or approaches that both national and global stakeholders can take to address these challenges? Anybody can start? Feel free.
Sorry, I can start. It avoids me losing my points. I, from a very Gates Foundation lens, 2 things which I would consider the top risks. One, I'm still not very clear when we talk about, let's say, responsible AI as a broader term. Responsible to whom? Right? That's a big question, which I think is not yet very clearly answered. Is it at society at large? Is it your client? If many of you serve many of the clients out here. Is it your local community, environment? There are multiple factors. I think it's good to just articulate that very clearly, because your mitigation steps or the ways to even consider if benefits outweigh the challenges and the constraints that we see, it's very important for us to do that. The second, which I would actually rate higher, it's a big concern when I see a lot of AI tools being pushed out in the market without any rigorous evaluation going on. And I don't mean necessarily just from a impact perspective, just considering all different factors which constitute the challenges around, I mean, again, sorry, just reiterating whether it's environmental or what is it being benchmarked against, right? So I'll just take a small example just to illustrate what I'm saying. So if we talk about health as a use case, we tend to talk a lot about, hey, here is a great new fancy tool to do screening, right? And a lot of the work that we see around evaluation around that or the benchmarking is against a diagnostic best option available for that particular disease or any program area we talk about. I just feel that there needs to be better articulation again on what are we going to assess it against. And these 2 for me are the largest risks that we see.
The largest risk that I see with regard to AI is a disruptive and not an incremental innovation per se, which we all understand as a lot of developers. And so what happens is when you are in a disruptive space, and with every technology, the regulations lag the development of a technology, and that's also happening, I think, in the AI world. That's the biggest risk. Kim talked about a lot of forums on which ethical and responsible AI frameworks are being discussed. But right now, there is no serious concerns geopolitically or globally around creating at least a common framework for AI to operate globally. And that I see is a whole risk not only for the citizens or for the consumers, but also for a large development society, community, of which India happens to be a very important player thanks to the large IT industry that we have developed and the large workforce that we have. So we are a natural economic partner as well as a consumer partner, which in the product space, originally we were largely in the consumer space. And I'm very thankful to Nasscom that they have proactively brought this playbook at least in place, so that we as a development community, we as a community which are actually not flushed with funds, but with very meager small fundings. We are trying to actually create a good economic viewpoint from an India perspective. The biggest risk today is the geopolitical situation that is therein. The world is clearly divided down into two clear divisions. One are the democratic countries with democratic value systems, and others with a lot of left of center or closed economies. The problem with AI is that AI needs to be safe, secure, open, and sovereign. And that is the way I think that the future of AI has to be decided, if it has to be ethically used globally. Now, the way in which data, technology, IP, and all other things, and all co-parameters that are associated with this technology are handled in these two distinct blocks, are at complete divergence as far as ideology is concerned. And here it's the biggest risk that the world is facing today. There needs to be some high-level principles that have to be brought into the world at a global level, where these two blocks come to a same platform, discuss it out, iron out, and create at least some sort of rules around AI. All these platforms that we are discussing, whether it's in the UN or GPAI or ITU, I see that one side of the block is proactive in creating these regulations, but we are making no efforts to bring the other block also in such discussion. And that's a very, very disturbing aspect as far as regulation development aspect is concerned around AI.
Hi, thank you so much, and thank you so much for those points made by Mr. Bidani and Dr. Garg. I wanted to build on what they highlighted, basically the fragmentation in the landscape, really. I'll cite a study. In 2023, there was a study that surveyed 200 ethical guidelines and governance mechanisms and principles. And I just wanted to draw attention to this sheer quantum of these instruments, and yet the lack of consensus internationally. So the enduring issue continues to remain that of operationalization, of operationalizing these principles. The Council of Europe did come up with a binding treaty inviting countries to join. There was some traction. However, it was the same approach of principled, risk-based compliance, essentially. I think moving forward, moving beyond kind of ensuring that these principles actually have teeth, have some sort of operationalization mechanism behind it, has proved and continues to prove, an enduring struggle. Because in one of our articles, we have highlighted how some of the approaches currently in use can involve normative ambiguities. For example, at the level of implementation, it depends on individual regulators' risk tolerance, whether a particular action classifies as a violation or not. So we need to think carefully along those lines, essentially. Consequently, we have had similar scattered initiatives at kind of evaluation and auditing mechanisms. However, one of the two most well-documented mechanisms or auditing efforts kind of came under fire because one of them did not disclose their contractual relationship, and the other's output was put under a non-disclosure agreement. So it kind of really defeats the purpose of the whole exercise, essentially. And also, if we look at the EU AI Act, there are conformity assessments that are expected. So if we are expecting auditing practices to become mainstream at some level, There are allied issues that perhaps we need to be talking about, like the legal liability for auditors. Are auditors legally liable for errors or omissions on their part? So there are a whole host of institutional issues that perhaps we need to address, because as governments go forward, trying to balance innovation and regulation, we need to build that regulatory capacity. We need to build that institutional capacity to kind of ensure that our institutions are adequately staffed with the required expertise, with due processes laid down. And I think that recognition of both what is required in terms of our national innovation competencies, as well as our regulatory competencies, and how do we align them together at home, kind of becomes a leading, kind of becomes a good practice case to what we kind of then propose abroad. Because currently, the international fora, there is lack of consensus because there is so much happening. So there needs to be a driving force to kind of bring all of those efforts together and kind of then recognize some of the nuts and bolts that are actually required to kind of anchor those practices at the level of implementation.
Thank you.
As Suhel said, it's very difficult to complete. Maybe try to be quick. One of the fundamental challenges that we see is that the human consciousness can be impacted with Gen AI. That's, I think, is the biggest challenge. And this consciousness can be, let's say, somebody approving on your loan in a bank, and he uses a model to say whether he should approve a loan or not. And let's say the model is biased for whatever reason, and it makes a recommendation continuously for a person that he cannot get loan for some specific scenarios. We, in fact, we are building something called Turing Tester LM, where we are trying to understand what kind of models are responding how. And there are issues like, even if we say Supreme Court has approved this person to be given loan, and the model is saying, no, you cannot give loan to this person, right? A lot of very important models globally. So this is a very, very foundational problem, and this can, this is certainly a civilizational level issue. And as Mr. Ajai was also speaking about, there is a critical need to build a common framework globally, and I really appreciate Nasscom AI in taking that initiative in responsible AI space. One of the closest that I see globally is on NIST AI risk management framework. There are 8 attributes that they speak about, and that we see reflection in Saudi Arabia's ethical AI recommendations, on similarly Japan and Australian recommendations as well, which is, we call it as PASPERS, which is privacy, accountability, safety, security, fairness, explainability, reliability, and sustainability. These are the 8 attributes, and each of these are research areas. How do you implement these in deploying models, right from data collection to model training to deployment to inference and governance? These are very, very critical steps, and I'm very happy to see this framework set in the playbook as well, of these stages, right from data collection to model training to protection to inference and governance. I think these are major challenges in front of us. I think this is a great initiative. Looking forward.
Thank you. I'm going to do a deeper dive with each of the panelists, but before I do that, I'll put off my moderator hat and just put on a couple of inputs. I think it's quite disheartening to see all of the panelists talk about there's a lack of a common framework globally, there's a lack of a common principle. UNESCO is clearly not doing our job as enough. At UNESCO, we do have a global framework that outlines the principles of ethical AI development. And this is a little bit of a different approach than the risk-based approach, which is the AI Safety Act. We talk about the overarching principles that has to be at the center of design, development, and deployment. And it's not just a tool on the shelf. We do have toolkits to help support member states in implementing and operationalizing some of the principles that all of the panelists talked about. And I can go on a little bit about that, but maybe I'll bring that discussion back. Again, maybe UNESCO is not doing the job enough. Maybe there are too many frameworks at the global level. And I wanted to go back to you, Mr. Suhel. You raised an important question about to whom are we responsible to? There are many different stakeholders, and clearly not one entity is enough to tackle these issues. I wanted to understand your thoughts on, is there any harmonization or joint efforts that you can think of aligning these different efforts on risk managing of the AI potential?
Okay. Sorry, before I respond to your specific question, I don't think UNESCO is doing a bad job. I think the other point you made on maybe too many frameworks out there. B, what UNESCO came out, and all credit to UNESCO to be very proactive in bringing it out much earlier than everybody even started talking about it, has been good as a reference document, but when we talk about country-specific, even guidelines to come, it has to be contextualized. There is that additional effort required. And also each country may approach it differently, or even a regional, like we all know, right? India tends to be somewhere in the middle. If you look at the last 2 decades of India's own technology journey, let's say starting from the National E-Governance Plan getting launched, we've always said there'll be a balance on regulation and promoting innovation. And we will continue to do that. That's what I believe. Having said that, I think a lot of conversations are being led by the government of India on setting up of an AI Safety Institute, ensuring that there are guidelines which go out from at least the national government. States may adopt a large part of it, add a few more things from their perspective. But we'll have to go a level deeper after that as well, right? Because the sectoral context again will vary. Again, I often say this, that if I compare a AI tool in the education space, the worst thing that could happen is possibly a child learning a wrong lesson or the wrong way, right? Unfortunately, health is too sensitive for us to go wrong. So we'll have to go a level below and see what needs to be done at that level. While governments, we believe, tend to be a little behind, as you rightly said, but I think it's also important for them to have a multi-stakeholder view before they come up with something, because it has a large impact. Right? So I understand it. At a donor funding agency or representing a philanthropic capital, there's a separate set of responsibility we carry, right? Collectively, can we agree what are we going to fund and what are we not going to fund? And just to your point, I don't think there's enough going on in the research side. And that's where at least we are putting a priority and saying, apart from funding use cases, can we also look at funding deeper research on understanding what are biases that are there in some of these large language models? How do we identify some of the risks? And most of it, I'll always give a benefit of doubt, are unintended consequences. We just don't realize, right? So somebody has to go with a very deliberate manner and look for those discrepancies that we would not want. My final point, we always talk about inclusion as a principle to be there in any work we do, and whether it's AI or broader sense as well. I think we need to just flip this, especially for AI. We need to test for exclusion. It's a different way to look at it, right? We need to go to the extreme cases and say, will this person get excluded? Or will this situation or context get excluded in what I'm building today?
Thank you. I'll also direct a similar question to you, Dr. Ajai. I think you highlighted the geopolitics around all of this and why that can be a challenge in aligning all these different approaches. Do you have any ideas on ways to harmonize all of these different approaches amidst the geopolitics?
I'll give you a very simple example. Like when the internet came into being in the early 90s and really started making some economic impacts, UNCITRAL came up with a set of model laws, how to regulate and govern AI. And unfortunately, and you came up with what you said, Kim, you came up with a very good framework around ethical AI. But the unfortunate part is today is that UN doesn't have the same teeth which it used to have some 25 years back. And so having a framework which is idealist in nature is one thing, but having and converting that framework into a regulated framework or a law in a country, that gives a much more impact as compared to. So what is the problem today is that most of the countries are not actually seriously thinking about regulating AI, at least at a level where the consumer is not harmed. Understand that on any technology or any impact that comes, the ultimate impact goes to a consumer and he needs to be safeguarded. And there is nothing happening that is actually safeguarding the consumer per se. You talked about the deep fakes. As Anand and Anand, we did a number of cases around deepfake, but they are not on the law per se around use of AI on deepfakes. They are using journal laws principles to actually get some guidance how deepfakes have to be handled, and that too for known personalities. A common citizen impacted by deepfakes still do not have any means to be safeguarded by this nuisance. So my point is that the harmonization, in a sense, has to be on two fronts. Because of cultural differences, because of the differences in the way AI will be used in different geographies, there has to be national regulations. And you cannot use journal harmonization globally for regulating AI. But because it's a borderless technology, there has to be some set of common principles around which AI should be regulated globally. And most of the forums that we are talking about are not rule-making forums. And most of them are forums where discussions at a research level can take place, a guidance can be provided, but rule-making forums are still not discussing certain set of, and that's true with the privacy law also. In a global borderless technology world, having 180 set of privacy laws divergent from each other, think about how as a developer, how as an entrepreneur, I will handle the global ecosystem in this 180 different set of rules.
Thank you. Just to respond briefly to that, I think, yes, the UN has the role of norm setting at the global level. And the role of the UN is to support member states, to support their policy initiatives, to implement these global guidelines. And that is, at the end of the day, the actual operationalizing these ideas through principles, through policies, is actually at the responsibility of nations. And what the UN does through regional office or country offices is work closely with the ministry, with all these key stakeholders, to ensure that these ethical principles are embedded. And to some extent, yes, we can't be perfect. We're not doing all that we can. But things like what UNESCO does on the readiness assessment, which is not telling the government what to do, but working with them to collect data on where the country stands. Let's start there. Let's see what the evidence and data is. And then let's think of the policy processes. And we're not just doing this in India. We're actually doing this across 60 countries around the world. And when the UNSG, the Secretary General, talks about there's a huge representation gap at the global level. Honestly speaking, it's the G7 that is largely represented. A lot of the countries in the global south are not at the table to start off with. And I feel like the role of UNESCO and the UN at large is to create this kind of national data and evidence and bring it to these discussions at the global level. So just to add on a little bit that I don't necessarily agree, but...
Kim, I have reached a stage of my life where I can be rude also.
I don't think anybody can reach a stage of their life where they can be rude.
Let me give you a very simple example. There are two major conflicts happening in the world. This is away from AI. two major conflicts happening in the world, which might have very deep-rooted consequences. Except you and everyone is trying to intervene to end these two conflicts. That's a simple point.
I don't want this to make a bilateral discussion. We can take it at coffee. But I wanted to also turn to you, Dr. Nandi. You raised an important word in your response previously. You said alignment. I think that's another very tricky issue. And I wanted to ask you your thoughts on what are some key challenges in making sure that there's alignment on standards to ensure AI safety and responsible AI.
Thank you so much. I think alignment is and will be an ongoing process because we need to manage expectations of a diverse range of stakeholders. And also, what exactly, I think going back to Mr. Bidani's point as well, what exactly are we trying to regulate for? Because AI has both, if we are thinking of risks, there are both technical and social sources of risk, right? We can have risk emanating from data, models, human interaction. Now, data and models we can evaluate mathematically, statistically, or through some other technical methods. Where social bias creeps in to a model is notoriously difficult. It can happen at a level of when the model is being trained through human feedback. It can happen at the level of human interaction, though I think end-user interaction, though I think companies have done much better over the years on the latter. So I think there is a question around that. What do we regulate and how? For example, implementing some of these evaluation strategies can also make the model computationally heavy. So is that, how do you balance that? How do you do responsibility at the expense of innovation, for example? And is that doable at a company, by a company? Secondly, when we are thinking of standards, I come from an information systems background. Standards are usually a function of maturity of the technology when functionalities have become stable, essentially. For a technology like AI, which is evolving not by just the virtue of innovation, but by the virtue of the nature of the technology itself. It's self-learning, and as Ayushi kind of pointed out, we cannot guarantee that all outcomes will be as per our expected or desired standards. So while we do have standard making efforts, there are standards at organizational and firm levels to kind of align practices to certain responsible approaches. I think we need to do a little more careful evaluation about what our expectations are, but also how do we get there, essentially. Because, for example, some of the evaluation strategies do not perform very well on intersectional parameters. They perform well on single axis of identity, like gender or race, but when we kind of take them together, or we take a couple of identity markers together, I don't think it doesn't perform as well. So I think we need to kind of drill down also to think about how do we bridge the gap between our expectations and our actualities, and because a recognition and cognizance of those aspects will lay out the dimensions of where and how we can align, I think, as stakeholders.
Thank you. I'll ask Mr. Abilash the same question, but maybe a little bit more from your background, coming from industries and startups.
Yeah, I would touch upon UN as well, because we had interacted with United Nations, and United Nations is taking a very important initiative on privacy enhancing technologies. There is a separate PET lab that UN has put up, and there are a lot of documentations and literature which has already been written on PET, and I think it is the right time for countries to adopt. In fact, one of the primary challenges that UN is facing is collecting data from National Statistics Office. I will say how it connects back to the larger problem that we have globally in terms of model training, etc. When a country is sharing data with UN, there is a lot of privacy concerns as well in sharing the data, and the data is not released out. It has to be kept in clean rooms, data clean rooms, before the data is shared. And if it is national sensitive data, the data cannot be taken, but it has to be, somebody has to come from UN, sit in, let us say, Germany, and then look at the data and then go back without the data, but just the knowledge of it, which is a very difficult problem, right? It's not the right way of solving problems. We are still in the Stone Age. So this is being solved by privacy enhancing technologies, where you can put, let's say, things like differential privacy with mathematical guarantees. Let's say a country can put out the data set and then like in a data clean room, in a differentially private data clean room, and somebody sitting in UN can query it with right kind of privacy guarantees and build statistics and analytics on top of it, which empowers everybody and empowers especially the bottom of the pyramid people who want to go up, which is where the biggest challenges are. Now, the same thing reflects in model development as well, right? And this is a technical problem. Like today, we are not this worried about security. Earlier, we were also having, in the 90s, we had similar challenges in security, right? How will we secure when the internet goes live and things like those? Same is the problem. All these can be mathematically codified, and how can you protect that is the biggest challenge. So similarly, for example, today we are discussing about bias, which is still to be, it's a research area, but privacy was a similar problem earlier. Now we have much better constructs in terms of privacy. For example, when I'm giving data, while security is protecting data from the outside, once somebody has downloaded the data, how can you ensure that he uses the data only for the purpose that he got the data, not beyond that? While security is easy, the right person to get the data is a different question. Privacy is about how do you ensure that the data is not used beyond that point. So things like differential privacy, or synthetic data with differential privacy, or things like private set intersection of two parties checking if it's similar data, or federated learning with privacy guarantees. These are very foundational, and standardization of this will help in standardization of building these technologies globally with mathematical proofs. I think that's the right approach, and this, I think, is the place where all countries are standing. For example, US safe, secure, trustworthy AI, as Ajay was also mentioning, it is very important that regulators also come up with this, pick it up from UN and make it as a regulation in the country. And in the voluntary commitments of US, they have come up with PET as a critical requirement in that, and that is becoming sort of a requirement. Same in EU AI Act as well. In GPI requirements, there are privacy regulatory requirements, and Training Data Transparency Act, which California recently passed, is also a very important direction, because let's say, think of OpenAI has to put out in their website whatever models they have published from 2022, what training data, not the exact data, but the type of data they have put, what is the rights they have taken in terms of law or IP, and what kind of privacy guarantees they have provided on the basis of CCPA, CPRA in terms of California. So this layer of privacy as the foundation layer and model as the next layer on top of it, and the protections they provide technically, I think is like very foundational. And this is a very important area to bring standardization, to bring protection, to bring guarantees in model building.
Thank you. I think we can clearly see that different stakeholders in the AI ecosystem have different roles to play in terms of standardizing, harmonization, to ensure that AI technologies are safe and equitable. I want to now turn the discussion to a key theme of equity. And when we talk about equity in the AI system, we have to also consider the AI global supply chain and how that is leading to inequitable development and access among different countries. So maybe I'll ask the first question to you, Mr. Suhel, coming from the foundation perspective. What can governments, organizations, international organizations like us do to ensure and bridge this inequitable situation in the AI global supply chain?
Oh, it's a difficult one, because the fact is that the moment you push for equity, we get into different kind of constraints. It could be as simple as lack of resources available, and I don't mean just financial resources, it could be just compute infrastructure, for example. I'll take India AI mission as an example, how at least we are seeing how India is trying to address some of this. I think the initiative taken under the compute infrastructure pillar of the mission is a great step forward, and I'm going around and saying we need to really learn from what India learns, and it's not been done elsewhere, right? As Gates Foundation, we are trying to do something slightly different in the context of Africa. It's more in terms of just can we pool in at least the development sector resources together to get the compute infrastructure, and then provide it for use cases which we'll broadly call it under the AI for social good umbrella. Because unless until it's a very deliberate set of actions being taken, I don't think naturally it is going to happen. There are lack of incentive structures for it to happen naturally. And that's not about AI. We've known this for a while, right? Any kind of the larger social impact use cases that we talk about. The second thing, which I probably go back to what Anulekha, you mentioned about the regulatory capacity and just expanding that, equally important, but also building capacity in the ecosystem that serves the principle on equity, right? And I don't know how many of you have seen a report released by Giving Tuesday very recently. I think it was a few days ago. If not, I'll encourage you to go and have a look at it, because it talks about the current level of readiness and capacity among not-for-profit organizations working at the field level or at the ground level, right? You can clearly see a discrepancy. Not that we were not expecting it. When they launched the survey, we expected that discrepancy to come out, but it's startling. What can we do to just ensure that they are also not left behind in this entire journey, right? As we go through this phase of advancement from a larger humanity perspective. One last point I'll just make on the role that I think, at least I'll talk about Gates Foundation, but would love to get consensus from other organizations in the space, including the UN. We need to really try and ensure that there's a level of understanding that people in the societal context, again, have of how it impacts their lives, right? I just keep fearing that every single large transformation has led to the gap getting enhanced, and is this the next wave of it? I don't have answers today, to be honest. I just feel we need to go deeper, understanding even from the stakeholders in the user groups, of what does this mean in terms of what they do today. And just taking an example on healthcare, because there are a lot of use cases that we see across healthcare. I'm yet to see a study which talks about how doctors or healthcare professionals see AI. We've just commissioned something, but I'm yet to see that study, right? So I think there's some bit of that work that needs to happen, at least from organizations like ours, and we'll keep pursuing it.
I completely agree on the necessity for awareness raising for all stakeholders and the consumers. I think a panelist in our next session will talk about this exact research you mentioned on the impact of AI on doctors and healthcare, and how research is so much more important. So we'll look forward to that. I also think you picked up on three critical elements of this AI ecosystem, which is data, computing infrastructure, and capacities. And Dr. Ajai, I would like to direct the next question, same, but from your experience, how can governments, the Indian government, international organizations, different platforms, work to bridge the inequities in data, infrastructure, and capacity?
Kim, what you rightly said and what actually Suhel has also said, my viewpoint is that despite AI being a major economic opportunity globally, AI also has the capacity to bridge diversity, inequalities globally. So once the negativities around biases, responsibilities, and all those are handled, the first responsibility of organizations, what you talked about, international organizations, is to declare AI as a social good. And then the supply chain mismatch, because understand AI is not only about software, it is a combination of hardware and software. The hardware is controlled by few companies across the world. We talk about TSMC, we talk about NVIDIA and all that, and there are issues related to trusted supply chains around that. And that's the first point. But the point is that once regulated, and countries, and like the incumbent president also talks about tariff measures as a way of blocking technologies or allowing technologies to be directed to few geographies, not to others. So it is a very important role of WTO and other platforms to actually come up with a certain set of tariff rules and measures which do not create supply chain barriers through non-tariff measures or non-regulated measures. And that's the first important thing if we consider AI as a social good for globally. The second important point is that the technology cost needs to be regulated globally. There's a huge amount of so in that, regulations around IP, regulations around the licensing costs, the interpreting the if standards are the way in which the supply chain stand, then FRAND has to be interpreted in the perspective that the least developed and developing societies also get advantage of the AI, and that's what I think are important issues that needs to be handled in global supply chains. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I move on to the next question, which is about India's role, is there anything the two of you would like to add on in this global AI supply chain discussion, or is it okay that we... So India has been really taking center stage in the discussion of AI global governance. I think Mr. Suhel also mentioned, it's in this middle where it can be definitely take the leadership of the global majority and the global south. And it is one of the only organizations that sit on all of these global AI governance platforms, including GPay and the UN. So turning the focus to India, maybe I'll ask you, Dr. Nandi, what do you think what role should India play in fostering standardization and harmonization, in leading the discussion on international cooperation for ensuring AI technologies are safe and equitable?
Thank you for that. I think we have a set of really forward-looking policies. Along with the India AI mission, we have the India Semicon mission as well. So there is a focus on developing national capacities and competencies. And because, like you mentioned, India's role and position in some of these international fora, I think it has a significant role to play in highlighting the voices of the global south. Because there is the inequality in distribution of resources, core capabilities are stark, right? And we have these two centers like the US and China, and there is a tussle, right? And in terms of core competencies, data infrastructure, compute, etc., just being realistic, there are things that we can do, and there are things for which we need partners. So we need to understand how do we secure our own interests. So for example, the expert group report, 2023 report, has very clear and very comprehensive approach to kind of thinking about some of these issues, kind of creating data infrastructures, creating that institutional and governance capacities. So there are those things that we can do ourselves. But if we are to look at expanding compute capacity, if we were to look at expanding chip manufacturing indigenously, those are things for which we need to have partners. We need to have good bilateral and multilateral relationships. So kind of being cognizant of that in many ways. And I think, so that is one point. And I think I'm really deeply encouraged to hear, about taking the ecosystem as a whole, not just our regulatory and policy elites and tech elites, but also looking at who are the ultimate end users. Prior to ORF, I was working at an implementation organization, and it is as stark as Mr. Bidani is pointing out. So we do need to think about our end users. How do they use AI? How are some of the laws that we are discussing sitting here in the comfort of this hotel? How does this translate to the end user at the last mile? So I think those are considerations that need to be factored in. I think because India has had experience in kind of developing innovation from ground up, DPIs, for example, so we have had a history of innovation attuned to our contextual needs and specificities. And it is a learning that we perhaps need to kind of translate in this domain as well. And I would end with that. But just to, on the point of research on AI in healthcare, there's a wealth of research in academia, which is quite boring. I can send those across, but I wouldn't do that to you. But there are studies looking at experiences of clinicians, doctors, diagnosticians, using AI as a tool to diagnose. And there are hits and misses. Some say it increases efficiency, some say it increases more paperwork, essentially, at the end of the day. So I just wanted to end on that, and thank you very much for this discussion.
Thank you. I think you also, I didn't raise the important point that India is the largest consumer market for AI technologies, and it has been the place for amazing innovations such as the DPI. So over to you, Mr. Abilash, on the same question, what is India's role?
Yeah, you brought in a very important point of DPI. India, I think, is looking at a technical way of solving social problems at a population scale. And AI is a very classical example from that perspective. And putting right guardrails is very important for protecting the democracy and the rights of the citizens. So I think from a technical, social good perspective, there is a great opportunity for India to lead responsible AI collaborations globally. Given the technical capability and the population and the data capability, I think there is a great opportunity. While Europe has been leading the world in terms of regulation, whether it is GDPR or EU AI Act, implementing it on ground with technology which can actually meet the end users' needs and common citizens' need is a very critical requirement. And standardization of it in terms of collaboration and co-creation becomes very critical. For example, standardizing on the technologies which can probably go on top of, for example, Niti Aayog had come up with something called DEPA layer on top of the UPI, probably as the DPI part. Things like those for AI with corresponding technical safeguards in place can be very powerful in alignment with the right technical recommendations. For example, US is also a bit of technocentric regulatory recommendation. For example, you look at the safe, secure, trustworthy AI, it speaks about PET or the responsible aspects of it and refers back to NIST risk management framework. So it is very important to collaborate with similar minds which are solution centric and risk centric, and there is a requirement to match the risk to solution. Only then economy can function. So understanding the solution for the risk and mitigating it and thus unlocking critical value the right way, I think is the future, and whichever country can do that can lead this collaborative effort and bring something better out of this AI revolution for the planet.
Thank you, panelists. I think these are some amazing insights we had on the discussion of how to ensure that AI technologies are safe and secure and trustworthy. Now we would like to open the discussion up to the audience for any questions and answers. Please maybe briefly introduce yourself, and we'll take a couple of questions and ask the panelists to answer them.
Hello. Yeah, hi. Hi everyone on the board. I'm Kriti. I'm a product manager with BGSW. I had a question that since we were talking about India, and given that the dimensions in which the AI has to be defined, or responsible AI has to be defined, are too many. Whether it is in terms of geography or industry or use case, like just with India having, how do we ensure regional variability also and linguistic variability also? There are too many dimensions of variability. How do we address everything in one?
Maybe we'll take a couple of questions at the same time and then we'll answer.
Yeah. Hello everyone. This is Parishrat. I work as a deputy advisor with International Cooperation Cell of Ministry of Education, and I'm a research group member of Center for AI and Digital Policy, United States. I have a question specifically to Dr. Anulekha with respect to India's AI development. So India has proposed a AI Safety Institute, and since you have all mentioned specifically about the AI auditing, and that is the next step after the regulations have been come into place. So I would want to know your insights, and from all the stakeholders which are coming from various backgrounds, that what we can expect from it and what inputs we are looking forward to. Thank you.
Any next questions?
Hello everyone. I'm Shashank Patel from Department of East Asian Studies at University of Delhi, PhD researcher working on the technology policy domain, the intersection of the technology in the international relations. My question is very, blunt and clear about that. Are we, it means developing and developed or underdeveloped countries. Are we again ended as a fodder to the AI, like digital revolution did to us in the last 2 centuries? And is that equitable stakeholder thing will be realized for developing countries in the AI? We already talked about how the G7 countries have the upper hand in all the AI room, whatever patents and all the first movers advantage which we can tell that. So are the equitable AI can ever be realized for the countries who are, I'm not just marking it under the global north or the global south, I'm just making it very clear with the case of developing and underdeveloped countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe one last question.
Yeah,
The lady on the right.
my name is Sudipta. I'm from the public policy team Nasscom. My question is directed to Dr. Ajai Garg. Sir, you made a very interesting remark that at least in the space of consumer harms, there is a need for regulation, or at least you alluded to that there is like dearth of regulations in the Indian market. Now, there are two views, sir. We also get to hear that there are existing provisions. I mean, there are like a list of sections in the IT Act. There is like section 499, 500 under the IPC. There is section 57 under the Copyright Act with respect to any harm to integrity of a copyrighted work, or section 51 with respect to infringement. Just wanted to reconfirm with you, sir, are you referring to a legal vacuum which has, brought us to a point of inflection that we need to rethink our existing laws, or are you alluding to enforcement problem? Because if it is an enforcement problem, that would continue even if we make new laws. And enforcement problem has been India's legacy since, I think, maybe independence. So if you could elaborate on that, that would be very helpful, sir. Thanks.
Okay, maybe now one last question on the right, the lady.
Hi, I'm Arpita. I'm with the Digital Empowerment Foundation. I'm a researcher there. And our work is mostly focused on engaging with communities and grassroots, right, for digital adoption of technologies and how people can access citizen welfare delivery through digital means. So here, one of the challenges we are grappling with is how do we, take AI as a language, right? How do communities engage with it, right? So that's at the heart of our question, right? So here, AI is built on large sets of data, and to store large sets of data, we have data centers. And now data centers are set up in places which affect the land. rights. Like the communities who are directly affected are filing cases in the court, saying that the big giants are setting up data centers without taking taking us into the consultation process. So the land is being taken away. It's affecting water, like everything, the environment overall. So when we are talking about C as citizen, C as consumer, I guess something that is still lacking in our framework is C for communities and who are at the receiving end of this technology. So how do you then engage with big giants in the IT industry? How do we engage with governments who have policies laid out to protect the interests of the citizens and communities?
Thank you. I'll now ask anyone in the panel if they want to take, maybe let's start with the last question on the role of communities and their role in the AI technology ecosystem. Does anybody want to take that question? Maybe.
Yeah, this is a very important dimension of sustainability for communities, for energy, for usage. For example, Microsoft recently started the nuclear power plant, 3 Mile plant, right? Just so unnerving to look at it from a different dimension. So it's very important, and it is very important. Like right representation of communities are also done. That's a different problem. But in terms of sustainability, energy usage, land usage, water usage, these are very important areas. There are certain researches going on small language models, which can improve on large language models. So enterprises need to understand what is the use case, why should they implement large language models all the time, because that increases the compute requirements. Implementers need to have that responsibility of using energy, water, compute more efficiently, and there should be obligations correspondingly on top of them to use the right kind of models, the right kind of scenarios, and there should be also incentive from governments towards building small language models. So because you cannot wish away language models, now the genie is out of the bottle. It is very important to ensure that it is done the right way. So I think small language models will play a very important role. Similarly, there should be incentivization in terms of environment and green data centers and things like those. I think that's very important.
Thank you. The next question was directed at Dr. Ajai.
So you talked about whether it's an enforcement or a regulation problem. I think on the enforcement side, we are now doing pretty well on most with the courts, with the commercial courts in place. Things are moving quite fast as compared to what used to be happening. In the enforcement side, it's a problem of capacity and will to do it. But the important point what I was referring to is that the present set of laws are not apt enough to handle the regulation aspect with regard to AI. The simple is that if you talk about an IT Act which directly deals with every entity as an intermediary when they are regulating it, and if you call AI as an intermediary, it's actually not doing justice to AI, because AI acts, reacts, and take decisions. All three aspects are being covered, which intermediary never does that. So IT Act has its limitation. Whether we need to amend the IT Act or we need to come with new set of laws and regulations, that's something different. With regard to the Copyright Act, the main challenge with generative AI is the fair use clause. So you need to have a clarity globally around whether use of data and information on an AI platform is fair use or not, and that needs to. So what I was thinking, it has to be a combination of regulations, clarity on existing regulation, and yes, enforcement has always been a challenge, but it's a lesser challenge now as compared to what it was 5 years back.
Thank you. I think the next question was about equitable AI and whether that's really achievable for developing countries when all the stakes are stacked against them. I think the gentleman uses the word developing countries rather than global south for a deliberate meaning. Anybody would like to respond to that?
The first mover advantage is always there when there is an economic opportunity, and that's always remains there. Yes, I agree with it. But the end consumer in a large way on AI related applications, because they will be based upon use cases. Someone, the lady talked about healthcare, someone agriculture, logistics, environment. These are the issues which the developing or the less developed world will be facing more. If we consider and create an ecosystem where problems or supply of problems becomes a business opportunity, I think then we are dealing with equitability in this. Otherwise, these diversities always remain, and these actually create barriers to trade also.
Thank you. Mr. Bidani, do you
Sorry,
have...
can I just add a quick point? And I appreciate the point, Shashank, you raised. I think we've come a long way from where things were, let's say, 2 decades ago to now. And I get your point. I completely agree. We still have not reached an ideal state. But I do believe that today there's a voice that we carry. And India is in a very unique position, if you ask me. Because the world listens to us now. We are there in important platforms. But more importantly, as a government, we are very clear that we need to carry the voice of many other countries because we have a seat on the table now. And whether it's G20 or even Global Partnership on AI, I don't know if you've seen the composition of the member countries in that. I believe one country from Africa, correct? So I think we are moving ahead. And even on your point on patents, if you track now very AI-centric set of patents, and I don't recall the exact number, but I think you'll find India among the top 3 countries. But as I said, it's unique because as a government, as a broader society, we believe that a lot of needs to be put out as a public good, which is very different from the developed country approach, which has been there for many years, right? And it is forcing many of those organizations also to now react. It will possibly take some more time to be at an ideal stage, but I would not be as pessimistic as your statement was.
I was not referring to India, I was referring at a global scale. India has a unique advantage, I agree with you.
Thank you. Maybe the last question was directed at Dr. Anulekha about AI audits and your views on that.
Right. I think, India, if we look at the entire gamut of, approach, if you're looking at the expert group report, and you mentioned AI safety institutes, if I'm recalling correctly, right? It is taking a comprehensive approach. It is cognizant of some of the institutions and components that it needs to build. So I think there is hope there, and I think we are well placed because we have recognized some of those needs, some of those gaps in some of our key documents in this space. And because I think we come from a place of recognition of some of the work that we need to do, there is hope, and there is confidence that perhaps we are on the right track. So I think we are looking at a holistic ecosystem and a host of approaches and policies that are well placed to kind of take it on its next journey forward.
Thank you.
Just a small remark to the lady that talked about
diversity.
Because the whole discussion is around the playbook, so I thought I'll give you. Actually, you are right that the responsible AI or fairness actually has to be dealt with the where the AI application is directed to. So if there is a healthcare problem in, say, Gorakhpur, you can't be using the data from New York to actually deal with that problem, and that's a clear divergence. So the playbook actually has frameworks in which you are actually dealing with compliance metrics on the basis of where your application is directed to, or the sector your application is directed to.
Thank you, everyone. With that, we come to the end of the panel, and please join me in giving a round of applause to the amazing panelists.
I'll quickly request Raj to felicitate our speakers with a small token of appreciation. So after this session, we have two very exciting fireside chats lined up, one on navigating the AI risk landscape and the other one on aligning capital with responsible AI, after which we will be hearing from two AI policy experts on their novel proposals for reform in AI governance. But before that, after this, we'll take a 5 minutes break. Tea and coffee is being served in the room at the back, and we hope it's no longer than 5 minutes. Requesting everyone to break for tea for 5 minutes, and then we'll be back.